All right. Welcome back, everyone. It is currently 1:09 p.m. Central Time, Friday, March 15th. We have a guest on the show, my pal Dylan. Dylan, welcome back.
Happy to be back.
So what we're going to do today, this is for all the non-WVU fans out there, this is going to be a very WVU-centric post because I don't know if you know, Dylan, we're looking for a new basketball coach.
We've been kind of counting the days to this being official. I think everyone kind of knew, even as far back as Eilert getting the interim job, that this was just a get us through kind of situation because we wanted to keep part of the roster together if we could, and knowing that most coaches understanding the portal scenario these days, you can't take a job in July anymore. It's just not a recipe for success.
Yeah. So I'm just now realizing your shirt is the state of West Virginia and a American flag. I like that very much.
With Montaigne Semper Liberi on the bottom.
I like that. So let's give a bit of a backstory first before we get into all the candidates. So Bob Huggins was going to be the coach, I think, for the foreseeable future until he had a very tumultuous summer last year where it involved him going on a Cincinnati radio show and saying some derogatory comments about a certain
various
sexual orientation. Yeah, various groups of people. That's a good word for it. And then the university cut him some slack, and then he gets DUI. And I don't know about you, I was always of the opinion that you can do one of those things, like, and in one off season, you can't do both.
Yeah, you can't have, because there were so many people, even after, with the political climate and the societal climate that America has gotten to in the last 10 years, you can't make those comments. But and frankly, if the new coach, the new hire comes in and makes those same comments, they don't get that leash. And Huggins, with 20 years and a lifetime of service to the university, bought himself more slack than I think most people would ever have gotten in that position. And even if you ask, WVU mega donor Ken Kendrick, he wouldn't have served. He's like, Kendrick literally said this week, he said, if Huggins was working for me, he doesn't survive 24 hours after that radio interview. And so I think that, combination, Wren didn't want to be the guy, and you and I had talked about this. Nobody wanted to be the guy that made Huggins go away. But when you
Except
have those,
Shane Lyons, apparently.
Our opinions on Shane Lyons are well documented on this show.
Well, so for those listening who aren't WVU fans, Shane Lyons was the athletic director at West Virginia just, a little over a year ago, and got fired. And then it came out that he had apparently been trying to get Bob Huggins out. And I don't think it's any secret that Wren Baker was hired, who has a basketball background, when you have Bob Huggins, and then Bob Huggins blew it to the point where we had to fire him. I didn't expect him to get fired after the comments he made on the radio show. I thought he was in for, quite a punishment, though. The DUI, I was still kind of like, he might keep his job. And I'm not surprised that he ended up resigning. And then we entered a coaching search for about a week. And I don't know about you, man. I was blown away. Like, I think our fan base is pretty dumb. Like, every fan base can say that, but the amount of West Virginia fans that were, one, still arguing Bob Huggins should be the head coach was astronomical. And two, wanted guys from his coaching tree who aren't very successful to take over at West Virginia, i.e., Andy Kennedy, who's now at UAB, and Jared Calhoun, who's at Youngstown State.
Yeah, I think especially after the situation, and I kind of saw a joke on some message boards yesterday with non-WVU folks that said Wren Baker's coaching candidate search, if you had dinner with Bob Huggins in 1986 and looked across the restaurant at him, you're not in the running for the position. Is the level of separation that Ren Baker is going for, which I think there were a lot of people looking at Andy Kennedy, and UAB fans that I was chatting with on some message boards were like, thank God Huggins screwed this up because we get to keep him, because he's become one of the most successful coaches for UAB, turning that program around, considering the lack of history that program has. But
that was a big, like, considering, like, second part. After you said considering, I was like, okay, I can get behind that. But the whole first part, I was like, come on, man. Like, this was the argument I was making last summer. I was like, well, because West Virginia fans were like, well, he has over 300 wins. And I'm like, how many tournament appearances does he have? I think he's got 2 in 20 years of being a head coach.
Well, and you look like, he had that run at Ole Miss, and you see what, Chris Beard, our opinions on Chris Beard's personal life, aside, in 1 year, Chris Beard has taken them to a level that Andy Kennedy never got them to. Yep. Chris Beard, hell of a basketball coach, terrible human being. But that being said, some of the other candidates that we're going to talk about that have done significantly better turnarounds given the circumstances and program history, I don't think Andy Kennedy would have been in anyone's top 5.
Yeah. So I do want to touch up on that coaching search in the summer, because I went back and forth with my dad. He was convinced that we could poach someone from another school, and I didn't think so. This was June, like maybe starting to become July territory when Bob Huggins got in trouble. And he was convinced we would be able to get someone from another school. And I said, I just don't think so, man. I think people at this point in the calendar are bought in for the upcoming season. This is just really late in the process, and no one wants to leave their current school to come to West Virginia, which is kind of a mess right now. And, ended up being proven right. And I said from the beginning, once we got rid of Huggins, that we just go with the interim approach, take it on the chin for a year. If we have a great season, great. If we have a terrible season, whatever. And ended up being a terrible season. Which brings me to my point about Josh Eilert my question to you about Josh Eilert. What did you think of his job this year? Like, it's really hard to say that he was terrible. Like, he was dealt a shit hand.
Yeah, I think that's the caveat to any judgment, because there are people who go, oh, well, we went 9-23. It's like, okay, but if we poached John Calipari last July, how many wins does Calipari get with this roster?
Maybe I was honestly before Kirk Kriisa got hurt or was suspended, and Raekwon Battle was suspended, and which that's a whole nother conversation with this team. Jesse Edwards missed time. A Cook missed time. Like, there were so many guys. We were so shorthanded at times. But before all that happened, I thought this team had a chance to win 18, 19, 20 games. But I thought that was kind of a stretch and being, like, pretty optimistic. So, yeah, if Calipari was here, I'm not sure we even get to 15 wins.
Yeah, and I think, it's the additional circumstances. If you get that roster with a healthy Jesse Edwards, because he never got back to form with the wrist. Yeah, he had 36 and 15 in the regular season finale, but he could have had 50 if he was, I think in the second half of the year post wrist injury, he was shooting like something like 40-50% from the free throw line because the touch just wasn't there. And so if you get that roster from, late December, early January, give them a full season, I think this team could have had a chance, even with Josh Eilert at the helm. But the frustration that I had year long with Eilert wasn't, understanding that this wasn't going to be a 20-win team in any set of circumstances. It was just the lack of, ingenuity on offense. We were running the same 5 plays every game, regardless of situation. The defensive commitment never seemed like it got there. And I don't know if that's a roster issue or a coaching issue, because there's certain guys that you just can't make play defense, and getting this roster to even commit to not giving up 85 a game was just a struggle. And at a certain point, that has to be at the feet of the coaching staff and, very inexperienced staff, because Eilert couldn't poach assistants from anywhere either. And, if you look, Ruoff, great
He
motivator.
just hired former West Virginia players.
Right. It was essentially, and we kind of talked about this morning, you and I, fantasy coach. This is a fantasy coaching camp, coaching staff is what it is. And, maybe in 10 years, Ruoff and Deshaun Butler, I think.
Ruoff, correct me if I'm wrong, he was already on the staff as a GA.
Right. He had come back to finish his master's, I believe. And so he was already there.
Deshaun Butler kind of came out of nowhere because he was still, maybe bouncing around overseas as a player.
Well, he had kind of poked around some assistant G League roles.
Was he?
Some second and third assistant roles. So like he at least had some coaching on the resume. And then Jordan McCabe,
who just got out of college like
a
couple of years ago.
You and I were poking around campus with Jordan. Like
I think he was on campus when I was in grad school. Yeah. So it just wasn't a great situation. It was never going to be a great situation. But, I do want to give Josh Eilert some credit. He was dealt a shit hand. I think he handled it really, well for the most part. Nothing like necessarily on the court, just with the press. And
the professionalism. Professionalism was outstanding. And I even saw, talking with some Louisville folks, the juxtaposition between a multi-year permanent head coach that Louisville just got rid of in Kenny, and the victim blaming of everyone else. No one helped me succeed at Louisville. And just putting everyone under the bus and turning the key that he could even list. And then Josh Eilert put in an impossible position. And, he said, hey,
was he not?
Just as many wins
in a much more difficult conference too.
Exactly. Louisville won 3 games this year, 4 games. I don't even follow Louisville. They're so irrelevant. Well, no, I mean, in the ACC.
Yeah. So anyway, back to what I was saying. I was listening to someone talk about it on their show or something. I couldn't even tell you who, on Twitter maybe. And he was talking about how it never helped Eilert either that Bob Huggins was attending every single game. And I'm not trying to say Bob Huggins shouldn't step in the Coliseum again. I'm not. He's a basketball guy. He loves WVU. I still believe that to this day, even though, we ended it on bad terms. I don't blame him for being there, but that's a big shadow behind Josh Eilert, when he's on the bench coaching a game and he's got Bob Huggins in the stands.
Yeah, and I think
every single fan in there is like, not every single one, but Bob Huggins should still be the head coach.
Right. I think you have that contention, and then completely night and day different situation for John Shire at Duke. How many games does Coach K, who titan of the game and well respected, even to his last game? I know you and I were basically live texting each other during his final game, post on the court kind of goodbye speech to everyone. Like you and I were like, everyone was tuned into that. And I think Coach K has been to 3 games at Duke since John Shire's been the head coach.
I know he was just there because I had the game on last Saturday for UNC Duke.
For the UNC game. And I'd be curious because I would have to look at, which 2, 3 or 4 games that it's been and see John Shire's record in those games.
Yeah. So let's move on because I never expected Josh Eilert to get the job. It was pretty evident when the university released the graphic that said he was the interim head coach, and interim was like in bold 80 font.
Right. It was like,
100-point font.
How many different ways can we convince you that this is temporary?
So where would you rank this opening right now? Because Ohio State, I think, is technically open for now. Louisville just opened up, and West Virginia has been open, obviously, since the summer. In my opinion, I think we're third of those 3. But those are the 3 biggest openings, I think, right now.
Right. And then, second, slightly, competitive, but not at the level of facilities or commitment. Vandy and Oklahoma State opening in the last 24 hours.
Did Oklahoma State open? I was wondering when they would fire.
Last
okay.
night. That came out last night, late evening. And so I think, that's another Big 12 opening, but the level of basketball commitment that Oklahoma State has, obviously some legacy traditions, the big names, in their coaching history, but that job isn't what it was in the early 2000s.
No.
And
I honestly think we're a better job than Oklahoma State in basketball.
Well, and even, there were people making some comments this week that, you looked at the Houston game, Oklahoma State had nobody there. Games like that where they can't even get, West Virginia in a season in which we knew that there was no chance, averaging 11,000 fans. That's
I would
the level
of those 5 openings, and unless another one opens up that I just don't see happening, like Tom Izzo retires, or I don't think Duke's going to move on from John Shire after year 2. I don't know what other jobs are going to open up. I would say it's probably Ohio State 1, just because of the football success, which does carry over to basketball.
I think it's just a Big Ten. I think it's just a Big Ten connection. I don't know that the job, they have some deep history in basketball, and their facilities are on par with some of the upper level, but as far as dedication to the fan base, they have some good attendance numbers, and knowing that contract could be higher.
Really should be a lot better in basketball.
Right, because if you look back in the 50s and 60s, they were a dominant basketball program. And then they've taken the better part of the last 40 years off, save for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. But then I would rank Louisville 2nd, just in terms of program history. It's an ACC job. Yeah, I just think it's a better job than West Virginia. Then I would put West Virginia 3rd. I would put Oklahoma State probably 4th, and then Vanderbilt 5.
Yeah, I think Vanderbilt is just a happy to get an SEC level contract kind of job.
So let's go through some candidates, and I have Mike Casaza's big board here, who's a reporter at 24/7 Sports, specifically for West Virginia, and he and Chris Anderson work together for West Virginia, or covering West Virginia. I don't think they'll mind that I'm using this. I know Chris. I work for him. I have a pretty good relationship with him. I don't think they'll mind getting this publicity, which isn't much. So the first name that comes up here is John Beilein. So John Beilein was the head coach at West Virginia in the early 2000s. I believe took us to the NCAA tournament within 3 years, maybe 4 years, got us back to where we were under the prime of Gail Catlett in the 80s. And then not only got us to the tournament, he got us to 1 Elite 8, 1 Sweet 16, and then in a rebuilding year, supposedly rebuilding year, we won the NIT. So then he took a job at Michigan where he went to 2 national championships at Michigan, lost them both, but really good coach. As of March 13th, though, according to Casaza, he says this is Beilein's final appearance on the hot board. There's no sign he's a candidate, which I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I never saw that going
also,
much of anywhere.
According to Casaza, he was apparently in the running last summer to be the interim for a year, and that would have been really interesting, but that fell through. I don't expect him to be a serious candidate. I think he's done with coaching.
Yeah,
probably coaching basketball in general.
Right, I think he might coach a youth team for his son's kids.
What happened to Pat? He was kind of rising in the coaching ranks, and then he just resigned out of nowhere. And then I've never heard of him since.
No, yeah, I don't know where that went. That's a name that I hadn't even put to mind in a year or two since he left his last gig.
Well, he was at Niagara and then went to Bowling Green, I believe.
And his last job, he was there for like a week or something.
Yeah, it was weird. But I remember one of my friends was like, he's going to be in line to be the next head coach at WVU. I'm like, well, maybe if he keeps going. And then a week later, he resigned, and I've never heard of him since. So just an odd situation. So Beilein. Then the next name coming up is John Becker, who's the head coach at Vermont. And this is Casaza's update, March 13th. He said this too could be the end for Becker, a popular option because of his resume and personality seem to be suitable for the situation. There is nevertheless an obstacle involved with a coach who consistently wins his one big conference and cannot win in the NCAA tournament. I don't disagree. I like John Becker. I think he's a decent coach. I'm surprised more schools haven't given him a serious look. But the fact that no school at the Power 5 level has really given him a serious look is pretty telling to me.
Yeah, and I think, the thing that you want to see with mid-major coaches is knowing that they have the lack of resources. I just want to see you not lose by 25 every time you play one of the big boys.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want some of the other guys that we're going to talk about when they play the big names, you don't notice a difference in coaching. They're just at a smaller, school, but they have the coaching ability. And with Vermont, it's like, okay, how many guys, if you took them out of a Power 5 job, put them in Vermont, are going to go 28-3 every year?
Yeah.
I think a lot of guys do. And when you get into the big moments, can you stand toe to toe with the guys that you're going to face on a Tuesday night?
And he never does
in Stillwater. And you're not gonna get that, I think, with him.
So this is I think, a legitimate candidate. It's Mark Byington at James Madison. Casaza hasn't posted an update with him since March 11th. He says Byington's resume now has 2 postseason appearances with a CBI bid at Georgia Southern. So he was at Georgia Southern, never made the tournament there. And here's my thing. I'm on point with you. When I'm looking at coaches at the mid-major level, and I got into an argument with this with my brother yesterday, or maybe a couple days ago. If you're at a mid-major, I want to see you make the tournament. You don't have to win games in the tournament necessarily, but I want to see you get there.
Right.
And he didn't do it at Georgia. Byington didn't do it at Georgia Southern, but he's doing it at James Madison right now. And I give him a lot of credit for that. If he's the hire, I wouldn't be thrilled with it.
Right.
But I would kind of be on like, okay.
He's a guy I'd give a couple of years to. He's probably number 4 for me, maybe number 3 in my personal list. But, and I say that just because of what we were just talking about with, can you go up against the guys that you're going to see 2 and 3 nights a week? And I look at that game in East Lansing to start the season when there's no expectation. Can you get the guys up for a game? And, at the time, people had much higher expectations for Michigan State than the season they ended up having. But they go into East Lansing. The Breslin Center, not an easy place to win under any circumstances, no matter, if it was, Izzo coaching a bunch of high school kids, the first team All-Staters from the state of Michigan. He could probably win a few games with those guys with that crowd behind them. And they go in there and they were not afraid. He didn't flinch as a coach. He had plays down the stretch that kept that game, from swinging the other way. And I think those are the things that, like, the longevity at James Madison of those big moments, we'll see, if that, kind of turns into things next week. But, that's a guy that I would give a strong look to. I think there are stronger guys that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. So,
and it's this next guy. Darian DeVry, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, who is the head coach currently at Drake. I'll be honest, I'm warming up to this guy more and more. Dylan, I would probably put him 3rd on my list.
I might even put him in my top 2. He's kind of moved up in the last couple of days for me because it's a name that you and I hadn't talked about much. You and I talk about this every few days. But if you look at the history,
I know, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I know we've talked a ton about the opening, and I remember a couple of weeks ago, you sent me a list, and I was like, okay, yes to this guy, hard no, and maybe. I don't remember him being on that list. Do you?
I don't recall, because when you mentioned him, I was like, I didn't realize, and then, we kind of talked about Mike's list. And I was like, this is a name. I was like, give me 20 minutes. I'm texting. I was like, give me 20 minutes to look at him. And then I came back and I said, I'm in. Because if you look at the history of Drake as a program, he was a longtime assistant at his, previous, stop.
It
And
was
then Creighton, yeah, he was there with the
well, he was there for 17
current
seasons.
staff.
I should talk about him. There for 17 seasons at Creighton, and I know is it Greg McDermott? Not Doug is his son. Greg McDermott has only been there for the last decade or so, maybe a little bit longer.
So he kept him on. He came in with the previous staff.
And Drake as a program in the last decade before he took over had not won more than 17 games, had not been in the NCAA, or maybe it was 18 games, had not been to the tournament. And then he gets there and they've won 6 straight 21. They've won 6 straight 21 seasons. They've been to the tournament, I think 3 times now in the last 6 years. Like that's what I want to see. That is what I want to see.
He is Drake's direct equivalent of what Scott Drew is historically for Baylor. Not to the direct level of success with national championships yet, but historically Drake, we just talked about 6 straight 21 seasons, 5 seasons of those with 25 or more wins. And before he took over, they had 5 seasons with 25 wins. They had 5 seasons all time with 20. And 3 or 4 like lifetime as a university appearances in the tournament. So I think when you look at that and him able to just come in, not even year one struggles, comes in year one, wins 24 games. Those are the kind of guys where it's like immediate impact. And I think personality wise, kind of being at that small school level, he's handled it well. And there's some other guys with like slightly better personality fits. I think just for the job that, because Ren Biggers talked about it, you're not a basketball coach. That may be what I put on your paycheck, but you're more than a basketball coach if you take this job. So I think that's some of the things where you look at guys that can handle the job and succeed are how they deal with situations in the public eye, more so than just the position.
We just got big news. Juwan Howard out at Michigan. I think that bumps us down to 4.
I think that was one that we should have potentially seen coming as well. And
I wasn't surprised. I'm not surprised.
No, I'm surprised that wasn't one of the first. I think that should have opened before Ohio State, given the amount of situations that Juwan has put himself and the program into in the last year and a half. So
Darian DeVry, as of March 13th, we're recording this on Friday, March 15th. Casaza said that DeVry's name is heating up. So take that for what it's worth. I would probably put him 3rd on my list of candidates. I've really warmed up to him. If he's the guy, I'm not going to be mad.
No, that's a guy I can get behind that, I wouldn't have seen. And I think a lot of West Virginia fans initially be like, who the hell is he? Yeah. But then you get to December next year, I think he would turn.
It'll really help if he can win a game or 2 next week in the tournament.
Right. Yeah, because there's a couple of the guys that, we're in, that we've talked about. And you've got, Binghamton with games next week, DeVry with games this week. And then, a name that I think is at the top of a lot of people's list that isn't, maybe second on a lot of people's list outside of, the big fish that everyone, is hoping for.
We're going to get to all of them.
We're going to get to all of them. But, I think I would put DeVry ahead of probably most people's big fish, which is my controversial opinion for the day.
So the next name is Bryce Drew, who is the brother of Scott Drew, who, as we just said, is the head coach at Baylor. Bryce Drew has bounced around. He was at Valparaiso, took them to the tournament a couple times as the head coach, and I think he was a former player there. That famous shot was him or Scott. And then he went to Vanderbilt and did not have much success at Vanderbilt. I know it's Vanderbilt, but still. He's now at Grand Canyon, and he is looks like he's taken them to the tournament for like a second time in 5 years or so.
Yeah.
I'll be pretty disappointed if he's the guy.
That's a name I've not seen too many places, and I think he's had I don't want to take too many guys that have had their shot at the I understand Vanderbilt's situation, but you got to give me something more than he gave me there. for me to be excited to bring him into the Big 12.
So the next name, and this is the guy who is second on my list. I don't know if he's even on your list at all. Shaheen Holloway, the head coach at Seton Hall. So he was originally he was the head coach at St. Peter's. He was the coach who got them to the Elite Eight a couple of years ago. Takes the job at Seton Hall. I think he's only in his second year there, and Lenardi has them as the last four in right now. So you're seeing a pattern there. He takes St. Peter's, who hadn't been to the tournament but 5 times in its history.
That has
he
one of
gets
the best Cinderella runs of all time.
And not only gets them there, gets them to the Elite Eight, then at Seton Hall within 2 years, potentially has them in the tournament. I'd be really excited if he's the guy, because I think he has roots in New York, like the New York area, which we have completely abandoned since that Final Four run in 2010.
Right. I think the thing that you may overlook a little bit with him, though, is the connection at Seton Hall. I believe he is a former player, so I don't see him, even as exciting of the hires that would be, I don't see him leaving his alma mater so soon. Even the Big East has some history where there's still that fire, and that's kind of what he grew up in. It's easier to recruit New York to Seton Hall, arguably, than it is to recruit them to Morgantown playing in the Big 12. Versus, in the Big East, it was easier for us to recruit New York back then because, we were playing Seton Hall, we're playing Rutgers, we're playing, St. John's. And so I think that's a tough job to get him away from, even at the level of the job that West Virginia is.
Still, though, money talks, and you got 2 Big 10 openings and 2 Big 12 openings, and not just an ACC opening, but one of the top ACC openings available. Like, I think these schools are going to spend money, and I could see him bolting if the money's right.
Yeah, I could see that. I think it's just going to be a bigger number than most people are going to think.
Yeah. Next name is Pat Kelsey, who is currently the head coach at College of Charleston. I originally was pretty high on him. I don't know about you. I have since cooled off. Not that I don't dislike him, or not that I dislike him, I don't. But that's quite a jump from Charleston to West Virginia. I'd like to see him go to like an American school like Charlotte and build them up into a tournament contender. What about you?
Yeah, he, for the good part of probably February, I would say he was either first or second on my list. I would probably keep him at second, just because of the personality fit in Morgantown. Because I've watched.
I would say he's a good fit.
I've watched Charleston play, knowing that I was, looking into, to him for potentially next year. I've watched them play a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, and the style of play, I think, it leaves a little bit to be desired, whether that would translate well to the Big 12. But I think the big proponent for him is something that you and I talked a little bit about before we started recording, is that he's not afraid to be a public figure where he is. So if you actually go back to his Winthrop days, which he struggled his first year at Winthrop, and then they never finished below third in the Big South his last several years there, a couple of tournament appearances at Winthrop that got him the job at Charleston. But he was at Winthrop right as the Sandy Hook Elementary massacre happened. And it's not a position or a situation you get a lot of basketball coaches commenting on publicly. And that week they had played in Columbus, coincidentally enough. And, kind of reporters just asking questions. And he kind of stops the press conference and gives an impassioned several minute long speech about, kind of fixing, gun violence in America and, what we have to do, made some connections with families of the victims, brought some of them to Winthrop, honored them at a game. Winthrop had a game where every player, their nameplate was a victim from Sandy Hook, and kind of just taking that extra step as just a public figure, and him being, especially a young coach back then, willing to make that, commitment. I think he was probably a new father back then based on, his son's age now, or was something that he was willing to put himself out there for. And I think in situations that happen in Morgantown that, become, or even just in West Virginia in general, that's the personality that you need to see. Now the basketball, kind of aspect to it, I'll leave kind of Ren Baker and others to decide on, but that's a personality that I think would fit well.
Yeah, so he's also I believe he's from Ohio, has roots in Cincinnati. Feels very Bob Huggins-ish.
Right, he does. He was a point guard for Cincinnati Elder, which is one of the. I lived a year in Cincinnati. You have some Ohio connections as well. Cincinnati Elder is a historically good program in the state of Ohio, and his first coaching position was as the assistant coach at Elder. And I watched Elder play a couple of times, when I was living there, and that's a program that has produced quality talent and still continues to.
Yeah, if he's the guy, I'll be a little excited. His teams at Charleston seem to be able to shoot the ball well, score points, which is what we need to do in this day and age. Like it's not really a defensive game; it's an offensive game, and I think that would work well. I would just like to see him do it at a bigger mid-major school, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, we'll see what they're able to do.
Tournament. He upset Virginia a couple of years ago.
Right, like he's had those big moments. I just don't know if the CAA is the proving ground to get you ready for the Big 12.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If he could take over like an American school like Charlotte or East Carolina or a school like that and build them up, then I'd be all for hiring him.
Yeah.
Next guy is Dustin Kearns, the head coach at Appalachian State. Don't know a ton about him. I just know that he's been there a short amount of time, has them in the tournament, I think, this year. I'm reading Casaz's update, which was from March 11th. It says, oh, no, they're probably not going to make the tournament. They lost in the Sun Belt tournament, so probably not. I think that's out for me.
Yeah, kind of just looking at a quick blurb about him. Like he's turned App State around, which has no basketball history whatsoever. Yeah. But I think, again, that's another like too small, hasn't been there long enough. It's kind of on the same level as a guy that I don't know that we might talk about, and Amir Abdur-Rahim, kind of guys like that, where it's like, have you done it long enough that I believe that it translates?
I agree. Again, I don't have stupid high standards, but if you're at a mid-major, I'd like to see you make the tournament.
And I think a lot of the times you need to see guys to make the jump into like the most difficult basketball conference, in the running. I want to see you going, like JMU this year, 31-3. You can't be losing it, like, because even that's a mark I have against Pat Kelsey. 26-7 at Charleston. I know you played some big boys, but like I don't like guys losing almost 10 games at that level.
Next name, which Saza has already said probably to rule out, is Chris Mack, who was the former coach at Xavier and Louisville. Weird situation at Louisville. I don't even know all the details. I just know he got fired, which was always odd. I thought he was a pretty good coach at Xavier. I thought he'd be a good coach at Louisville. You know him better than I do, though, apparently.
Yeah, so I first job out of college, ran some fantasy camps. That was while I was living in Cincinnati, which was the time that he was at Louisville. And, just the stories you hear when you're closer than most people are in the public, just kind of just something always felt off to me, when Chris Mack was involved. And then just the way that he left Louisville, I think was, something that gives people a lot of pause. And you and I talked this morning about, that situation, that update. And I think with the way that Bob Huggins' situation ended, I think Ren Baker, he's not looking for the pastor, but, he's looking for, somebody wearing a suit and tie that's done things the right way, choir boy type, that doesn't have obvious skeletons publicly disclosed.
Yeah, I don't think he wants a cloud hanging over the coach.
Because then you're going to have that portion of the fan base that was like, well, why can't we just put Huggins back in the chair? It's like, well, if we're going to hire a guy with skeletons, why don't you just bring back Hugs? Is what you're going to hear from a lot of the fan base.
Yep. And now we get to the big fish, which is Dusty May, who I have jokingly said for the last 9 months that he's the next head coach at West Virginia. Well, some bigger schools have opened up: Ohio State, Louisville, Michigan. I'll be very surprised if one of those 3 schools passes on him and he ends up in Morgantown. However, Casazza does say here in this article, WVU is in the mix. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's in the mix. And, he was by far and away, for you and me both, for the better part of since last August, been the guy that we were like, all right, let's go get him. And, I'm sure you have as well, kept a keen eye on FAU this year, watched the Arizona game wire to wire, and, kind of looked to see how that season transpired. And that soured me on him just a little bit. I would still be excited by the hire. Again, I agree with you. I don't think that he ends up being the ultimate guy to put pen to paper, but just the way that FAU handled expectations this year, coming off of that Cinderella-ish run.
I think they've handled it fine.
See, I think it's just like the Arizona game they got up for, but the kind of the argument that I would make is the big games they've been there for, but it's the games in conference. I watched a couple of their first conference games that they should have been 20 points better, and it's a nip and tuck game. They lost 3 or 4 games they shouldn't have lost, and those are the games where it's like, I think it's just the way that I know that he could get guys fired up when we're playing in Lawrence, when we're playing in Tucson. It's the trips to Manhattan on a Monday night in February that worry me if that translates from the American to the Big 12.
He feels very Louisville to me. I don't know about you. He's from
I
Indiana.
Could see it.
He's
from
a Midwest
Indiana.
Guy. Yeah, and Michigan, Ohio State.
Michigan, I could see more than Ohio State. I feel like it seems odd, like him in Ohio. I don't know. That's just a personal,
Only a state away
inkling. Right.
I just mean Michigan and Ohio State are huge jobs with deep pockets. I have a feeling they're going to be looking at other Power 5 candidates, unless Dusty May just blows them away in an interview. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I could see that as well. Yeah.
But from what I've heard, Ohio State, if they win today against whoever they're playing in the Big Ten tournament,
I could see them keeping the interim tag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Dusty May, he feels very Louisville to me. It's just south of, the state he's from, basically the same area, even though Louisville's technically in the South. But I could see that very much. And, maybe he doesn't want to wait for Indiana to open up, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen this cycle.
Right. I could honestly see him saying no to all 3, knowing that probably Mike Woodson gets kicked next year.
Next name is Greg McDermott, who is the current head coach at Creighton. And Casazza says, as of March 13th, this is likely McDermott's last appearance on the hot board. So he's likely not the guy. If he was the guy, I wouldn't be too upset. He's done really well at Creighton, but he's to the point. He's not that old, but he's to the point where, you know what? I'm happy where I am. I'm in the latter half of my career. I'm good here.
Well, so I think he fits personality-wise well with Creighton. I believe he just signed a mid-tier
He did. I believe
extension.
he signed an extension.
So, I think he's kind of set in there, and that's another guy that, they do well, but what has bothered me with Creighton, and not even, considering him as a candidate, just as a coach, what has kind of confused me is Creighton's record in the Big One. in the games that everyone's eyes are on, where there are expectations, Creighton seems to struggle.
Didn't he just make the Elite Eight last year? Maybe the year before?
Right. So they have that run, but then you get into like, they lose to the 7 seed this week in a game that
No, and
they
I
shouldn't
agree.
have been.
His track record is good, not great. Like he did very well at Northern Iowa, got the job at Iowa State, fell on his face, and then he's done well at Creighton. But some of that was his son, who went on to play in the NBA, Dougie McDermott. Was it Dougie McDermott? And I always thought, 10 years ago when I was at WVU, like he's only good because of his son. Well, he's gone on to have success at Creighton without his son.
They're in the top 10 now.
Yeah. So it'd be hard for me to say, like, turn my nose at the guy.
Right. But I'm not saying no. I'm just saying I think that there are higher upsides other candidates.
Mm-hmm. Nico Medved, who is, I think that's how you pronounce his name, current head coach at Colorado State. So Casaza gave an update today. It's nothing big. It just says that Colorado State's likely in the tournament. This doesn't do much for me. I don't know about you.
But so Colorado State's campus is about 75 minutes north of where I'm sitting. So I've been up there. I hear a lot of the local coverage, and Colorado State was a darling in November and December this year. Kind of up in the top 15 for a couple of weeks, and then they got into the Mountain West and didn't get a whole lot of national TV time. And the team really fell off in January and early February. They've kind of gotten it back towards the last half of, the last week of February, early March, kind of turned things around a little bit after that early conference season lull. But just watching them play as often as they're on, here in Colorado, just not something that excites me. The Mountain West, this is one of the deeper, top halves of the league that they've had in a while. As a league, that's not saying much for the league, but this is,
Well, I just mean, look,
I don't get much excitement from that.
History of the tournament in the last decade, it's terrible.
It's not good.
San Diego State broke that trend last year, but that's like the one school who has performed well in the tournament in the last decade.
Yeah, and I think if you see them, because they were, I believe, preseason number 1 or 2 in the Mountain West, finished with the 7 seed in the conference tournament. Colorado State.
Okay.
They were preseason top 2 in the league, finished 7th, and then kind of turn it on, right as tournament time, which is great. But when you look at the body of work, I just don't see him as a Big 12 guy.
I don't either. Next name is Josh Schertz, who is the current head coach at Indiana State. Had a good season, was believed to be the front runner to win the whatever conference that is, Missouri Valley Conference.
They
and then Darian DeVry and Drake upset them in the tournament. Now they're on the bubble. Again, this doesn't really do much for me.
No, I think
and I don't even know, has he made the tournament at Indiana State?
No, because they haven't, if I recall correctly, they haven't been since some guy named Larry Bird was trotting around campus. So
is that true? Surely not.
See, I thought that too, and I feel like I read that somewhere. I could be wrong, but
no, they made it in 2011 and 2001, but only three times.
So I remember what it was. They hadn't been ranked in the AP since Larry Bird. That was what it was. So you got them to that, and they probably lost 3 straight. But
since Larry Bird. So he's in his 3rd season at Indiana State. Has not made the tournament. Might not this year. No, it's going to be a no for me.
You got to get an NCAA tournament appearance if you want a Big 12 job. That's just, it's got to be.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, this is going to be. I got a story with this one. So Kyle Smith is the next name on this board. He is the current head coach at Washington State. When I mentioned earlier that my brother and I got into it the other day. It was over Kyle Smith. And so Kyle Smith, current head coach at Washington State, was previously at San Francisco and Columbia. Do you know how many NCAA tournament appearances he has under his belt in 15 years as a head coach?
I believe one at San Francisco or one at Columbia.
Zero. And my brother was arguing with me that we should give this guy a look.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was just saying about 30 seconds ago.
He's currently enrolled in grad school at Northwestern. But I'm like, am I missing something?
Because it's
now I'm going back to that argument the other day.
See, and that's the thing, like Columbia, you can win the Ivy. That was back in the Harvard Yale trading every other year. Like
decent mid-major conference. Like Yale and Princeton, like there's always an Ivy League school that like upsets a team in the tournament.
Yeah,
and he couldn't make the tournament there. And I know it's a tough, a decent conference, but come on, you got to make the tournament.
You get to the WCC where all you got to do is like give Gonzaga a game and win 25, and you got a shot. Like,
yes. And that was my brother's argument. He's like, well, how are you going to make the tournament in the WCC with Gonzaga and St. Mary's? I'm like, the only reason St. Mary's makes the tournament is because they beat Gonzaga like once a year. And then the committee's just like, well, we got to give St. Mary's a shot. And then St. Mary's falls in their face every single year. So anyway, I'm going on a rant. The reason why my brother wants to give this guy a look is because it looks like Washington State's going to make the tournament this year for the first time in over a decade. And the previous head coaches to put Washington State in the tournament were Tony Bennett and Kelvin Sampson. I get what he's saying, that it's a really tough job. But this dude's track record is not very good, in my opinion. I would not give this guy a call.
And I think if you look at Kelvin Sampson and Tony Bennett, what they had done prior to that were stronger candidates. Washington State was a quick step up, and I don't think either of them were there very long.
So Tony, let's look. Tony Bennett, who I believe Virginia did hire from Washington.
That was a direct hire, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's look. He was an assistant at Washington State. So he was promoted. And he was at Wisconsin. And I believe, didn't he have Klay Thompson at Washington State?
That would have been about the same time.
And he got them to the tournament twice in 3 years, made it to the Sweet 16 in 2008, gets the Virginia job in 2009. Okay, good for him. And then he's gone on to win a national championship, as we know, at Virginia. And then Kelvin Sampson was also an assistant at Washington State in the 80s, got the Washington State job, where he made the tournament one time in 7 seasons before getting the Oklahoma job. And then from Oklahoma, he went to Indiana, bounced around the NBA, and now at Houston. I get what my brother's saying, that it's probably a really tough job. But you cannot hang your hat on the fact he's making the tournament this year at Washington State, where the Pac-12, which is usually not a very good basketball conference to begin with, and is historically bad this year because UCLA is bad, USC is bad. Like, I'm sorry. This is not good enough for West Virginia, and I don't even have that high of expectations for West Virginia.
But and you look at beats Arizona once. That's like the calling card of his entire tenure. He beat them twice,
and that was my brother's argument. Was, well, he swept Arizona. I'm like, Arizona also lost to Oregon State. What's your point?
Right. I would say Arizona's lost some games this year that they had no business losing, and
yes.
The Washington State game that I watched was one of those games where I think Washington State just got on a heater, and are we looking at Bill Self losing his job because he lost to the worst West Virginia team of all, arguably of all time? They still lost in Morgantown this year. Crazy shit happens.
So I'm just not on board with this guy. There's a quote out there from Chris Mooney, who's the current head coach at Richmond, that he's the smartest guy in college basketball. Okay, that does nothing for me. I want to see you win games, and he hasn't shown me that he can win games. good for you. Look, I'll say good for you for building up San Francisco, because now the coach, that they hired after him got them to the tournament, and then now he's at Florida and he's not doing very well. I don't think anyway. Maybe he is. No, he is. They're in the tournament this year, I think. And then at Washington State, he's built up Washington State. Good for him. But this just doesn't do anything for me. And my brother and my dad were comparing him to John Beilein when we hired him. And I was like, no. John Beilein got Richmond and Canisius to the tournament before coming to West Virginia. You have got to get a mid-major school to the tournament, in my opinion.
Right. So if you're going to make that immediate jump, and we'll see what, I guess, kind of the referendum, I think, on him will end up being when Washington State essentially transitions to being a mid-major job next year. What will they look like?
Yeah. So I think that's going to be a no for both of us, sounds like. And that's actually the end of the list. Anyone on there that you want or to take a look at? I think that hit on all.
Yeah, I think that was our list that you and I've looked at. I think my 3 at this point are, and I flip-flop depending on what time of day it is and how much coffee I've had, between my top 2 being Pat Kelsey and Darian DeVry. And then I would put Dusty May 3rd, on my wish list.
Well, Dusty May is 1 for me. He should be 1. I get what you're saying, but I think that they have answered the bell this season. Everyone knew that, everyone knew what they were now after making the Final Four, almost went to the national championship last year. I think he's 1. I have Holloway 2, the guy at Seton Hall, and then I'm putting DeVry 3. I think those are my top 3.
Yeah, and I think DeVry ultimately gets the biggest look, but I think Ren Baker has shown historically that, it's going to be a name maybe that not everyone's looking at, but it's going to work out because of his history, current Texas Tech head coach. He's the one that found it. I was
just about to say.
So, he's going to look in the places that most people don't. He's a basketball guy, as we've said. So I'm going to give whoever the selection is, a very long leash, because if Ren Baker has confidence in them with his understanding of the game and track record of hiring coaches, you just look at Mark Kellogg on the women's side this year. Not a name that a whole lot of people were looking at. Comes in, takes a 19-20 win team to one of the better, arguably, and I believe statistically, so the best first-year job in women's basketball coaching at West Virginia as far as a wins total, and right to the tournament. Looking at potentially a mid-tier seed in year 1, leads the country in, at least in the Power 5, on a defensive level, which resonates very well in Morgantown, where Ren Baker hits on culture, hits on coaching, hires a guy that's never lost, which is a guy like Darian DeVry, where everywhere he has been in charge, from the day he's in charge, they win games.
And you know what Mark Kellogg did at Stephen F. Austin? He got them to the tournament.
Every single time.
I don't know about every single year, but
I know almost. Right.
So who do you think it's going to be? What does your gut tell you?
My gut tells me DeVry is a guy that Ren Baker will look at.
Yeah, that's my guess too. It's going to be hard to pluck Holloway from his alma mater. I think
Dustin May just goes elsewhere.
May, I think, is going to get the Michigan, Ohio State, Louisville, or if another job opens up that surprises me, that one. If it is Dusty May, I'm going to be jumping up and down and really happy. If it's Holloway, I'll be excited. If it's DeVry, I'll be pretty excited. After those two, I think it's a bit of a dip. But I will be excited for DeVry. If it's Byington
will give me pause. He will give me pause, but I'll give him a shot.
Okay, I can see it. Oh, I know another name I want to talk about is Will Wade. A lot of fans want Will Wade, who is at McNeese State. What do you think? Who and previously was at LSU.
Right. Right. I think that because what he got caught for at LSU was just doing NIL a couple of years ahead of the deadline.
I agree.
But I think where Will Wade gets pushed off of pretty much everyone's list because he took McNeese State, who won single digit or low teens wins last year. Takes them immediately to 31-3, best season in school history, right to the tournament. But I think again, as we're looking for that guy without skeletons, and the personality fit could not be further from what I think Ren Baker's looking for. He's kind of that hot shot guy. Even if he gets the job, I think he's here 4 years or less to get a job that goes elsewhere. Like he just doesn't, from a basketball coach, is a great hire, but it's another kind of on that Chris Mack level of personality where just it doesn't seem like this is the time to make a hire that some people would label as controversial.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think Baker's going to do it. I think he's going to pull the trigger on a guy just who's had success and just doesn't have that cloud hanging over his head. Anyway, like I was saying, I would put DeVry third. I think he's the most likely candidate right now. Probably Kelsey fourth. I really like that Ohio connection.
Yeah.
And his connections to Ohio. He was an assistant at Wake and Xavier, I believe.
Ooh, here's a name that we didn't go for, which I think isn't on a lot of lists. Steve Forbes at Wake Forest is a name that is off the radar, and I think has cooled off recently, just based on the success. Wake Forest is another historically up and down job, but
above Byington. Like he took East Tennessee to the tournament. Okay, he's done pretty well at Wake. Like I think they're on the bubble right now. They really needed to win last night.
They're 20-something wins. Yeah.
I'd like to see him.
20. Steve Forbes 24 wins every year at East Tennessee State, which is that's a level of success there. It's translated mildly well to Wake Forest without an NIL. But I think, again, he's not been they've had good teams, beats Duke, it's a good win, but it's not even without kind of Wake Forest NIL structure is very, very weak at pretty much all sports. But I think being able to be competitive there, but even without NIL, the good coaches are still going to find a way to win because winning still matters to a lot of players.
I don't have stupid high expectations for a job like WVU. I want to be in the tournament. I don't think this is ridiculous every single year, in the conversation to be in the tournament every single year.
Right. I think,
not in the national
championship
conversation. I just want to be in the top 64 or 68, whatever it is, every single
year. Or 96 next year.
Yeah, whatever it's going to be in a couple of years. And I don't think it's ridiculous to say, look, if we're going to look at this guy, I want him to have success and get whatever school he's at to the tournament.
Yeah.
And that's the argument I was having with my brother. Kyle Smith has not shown he can do that except at Washington State and a really bad Pac-12.
Yeah, because if you get UCLA on par with where they usually are, you get USC back. Right. You have you mentioned historically bad at the top of the Pac-12, and then you just slide into the number 2 spot conveniently. Utah
are your third and fourth team in the Pac-12. That's not a good sign. No disrespect to those schools, but Utah doesn't have a great basketball history. Neither does Colorado. And they're the top of the conference outside of Arizona, which I like the Wildcats.
And Colorado's your 3 seed in the league and still on the bubble.
Oh, and Oregon, by the way, is also down. And they've been a pretty good program under what's his name? Dana Altman. Yeah. They've been historically pretty good under Altman.
Right. I would say they've had some really good recruiting classes, some really good years. And when you can't name, I remember following Colorado being, close by, they're not even getting local media coverage. Like I forgot that Colorado was even in the mix to make the tournament this year, and they're the third seed in the Pac-12.
They're in a good spot. So, do we have anything else to talk about?
I think we've hit on everybody. I think our prediction has changed. Had we recorded this on March 1st, then you and I would have been saying different names. But I think Ren has made it very clear what he is looking for. The timeline that I've seen from him is to expect the hire, because you can't wait like we did last year. But last year wasn't Ren's fault, the timing. But I think the timeline he's laid out is very clear, is that we will have someone in the chair by the Final Four.
I agree. This isn't like football. In football, it's usually a week to 10 days once your job becomes open. Yeah. Maybe a little bit longer. I know when like Dana left and we hired Neil Brown, it felt like 3 weeks, but it was only about like 5 days.
Yeah, and I think another comment that Ren made was, that made it obvious he's looking for guys that are in the tournament or looking at guys that are coaching teams. Is said it's hard to get people to plug in to your coaching search when they're doing 3 game scouts in 7 days because they don't know who they're playing. So I think that makes it clear that like the guys that he's looking at that are at the top of the list that he's trying to make contact with are guys that are coaching come next Thursday.
I completely agree. And that's why I think West Virginia fans who think this is going to be wrapped up in a week, like, I got news for y'all. This is going to probably take some time. Yeah. And, the job officially opened up, Tuesday? Wednesday?
Tuesday night, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning was the press conference. I believe
Tuesday
it was Wednesday.
Was when the Big 12 tournament started. So I guess it was Wednesday morning. So we're not going to have this job filled by Wednesday. We might have some rumors of who's linked where by Wednesday, but we still have the tournament on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And our coach may or may not be eliminated. And if he's still going, that's a whole nother week.
Right. So
and then if he's still going, that's a whole nother week. So it's potentially another month before we officially have a coach.
Right. I think you're looking at how far does Drake go? How far does Charleston go? Like, I think you're looking at, guys like that, just, all 3. Yeah, I think the only way this gets wrapped up even next weekend is, does Drake lose in the first round? Does Charleston lose in the first round where he can get a hold of those guys? Does JMU, lose a close one? Like, those are the kind of, situations that are really going to determine this timeline more so than Ren Baker just wanting it over.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, if we're still at the Final Four and we don't have a coach, I wouldn't panic. Depends on who's in the Final Four. Like if Dusty May goes on another run,
right,
it clearly means we're still in the running for him. And if not, okay, we pivot and we move on. My guess is that's not going to happen, but it's going to be a little while. Just relax, enjoy some basketball, and know that our coach is probably in this field.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I'll leave it there. We're going for probably about an hour. We talked a little bit before the podcast. Right now we're at an hour, 16 minutes, give or take. All right, my man. It was fun talking with you. Hopefully we get an answer these next couple weeks.
I think so. It'll be a good one.
All right. You get back to work. I know I'm bothering you on a Friday afternoon.
I got to pretend like I'm working anyway.
It's a Friday. Who cares?
Right.
And it was your lunch hour.
Right. I was busy. Yeah.
All right, man. Later.
Take her easy.